moving on to other considerations that you need to take into account when you're setting up a relationship with an employee. What sort of things do you need to think about?
Right. So when you recruit an employee, especially if it's a high-level manager, you don't know him or her, and you need to have a period of time that you want to see if they bring the result. So a probation period is important, and it's important to set up the contract in the right way. So you can set up a probation period, and it's related to the length of the period of the contract. So if you have 1 year contract, you have 1 month probation. If you have 2 year contract, you have 2 year probation. If you have 3 year contract or more, you have 3 to 6 month probation. So obviously there's a conflict. Most companies want the shortest contract with the longest probation, and there's always a give and take. What do I need more, the longer probation or an easier way out? And there's always this consideration. We normally suggest to have a 3 years contract with a longer probation. And the reason is that in China, when you renew a contract, it becomes an open contract. And this means that an open contract is very hard to let go of an employee. So if you have a 1 year contract, you get to this third renewal very quickly. And then starting from the third year, 3 years in China goes very quickly, you have an employee with an open contract, and this is quite a burden. If you have a 3 year contract, only after 6 years, sometimes you can extend it to 9 years, you have an employee with an open contract. And by that time, I'm sure you know enough if this employee is good or not. If he survives 6 years, he's probably a good employee. So getting a 3 years contract with 6 month probation, I think gives you 6 months to understand, is this the right employee? And if he is, then he has 3 years to prove himself. And this is pretty much a good time for a good salesperson to show results and bring profits to the company. So the contract period is always related to the probation period. The agreement should be very well established. I mean, all the things that you want to put in the contract with the limitation of the labor law. The labor law is very particular. There are certain things that you can put in the contract and certain things that you cannot. We've seen companies that put some very outrageous clauses in the agreements, and then the labor law says, "Oh, it doesn't make sense." So you can put anything that you want, but then in court it may not hold. So you need to have somebody who tells you this makes sense to put in the contract, and this you cannot. For example, everybody wants to have a non-compete and non-employment for employees, so they don't jump to the competitor. But in China, if you put this in the contract, you need to pay salary or define a period of time. Let's say if you don't want him to work for another year after he left you with a competitor, you need to pay him salary that you decide in the contract at the moment that you sign. So all these things, you cannot just say you cannot work with a competitor. You need to pay him compensation for that period. So all these little things, you need to have somebody who knows how to draft the employment agreement. Employee handbook, I think I mentioned already. You need to put in the handbook all the items that you want to be the rules of the company. These are the rules, and every employee has to sign this book. And since this book is changing every year, every employee should read it and should sign it and make sure that people know the change in regulation. And then termination is very tricky. It's really not easy to let go of employees in China. You need to conduct a very proper and fair, I would say, procedure. You need to let the employee know that you're not happy. You need to provide them with training. You need to provide them with warnings. You need to give them a period to improve. And then if you did all of that and you documented everything, so everything has to be documented, the letters, the warning letters, the training letters, some agreements that you, KPIs that you signed with them, and you need to document everything. Only then you can go to court and say, actually, it's best not to go to court. You can settle with the employee and say, look, we tried everything and it doesn't work. Let's separate our own way. I'll pay you your compensation and you leave and sign all the documents. If things go bad, then you go to court and then you need to deal with this with the arbitration or court. And it's not that easy because the court normally favors the employee. But if you have everything documented, you have more chances to win the case or at least get minimal damages from the arbitration case.